Yeah, no, that's not going to work. No, I don't think Joe's the right guy for the job. Yeah, no, I think we need to get Sarah in there. Yeah, no, well, she's got the skills. She's got the right skills for the job. So let's get her in there. Okay, yeah, thanks. I'll talk to you Monday. Okay, bye. Whew, man, it's a stressful life running the company. It's really important that you get the right people into the right job to be successful. And the same is true with worker placement board games. So welcome to the Meeple Maven. In today's video, we're going to be covering the worker placement mechanic in board games. 3,500 games that are classified as having the worker placement mechanic within the game somewhere. And 26 out of the top 100 games on Board Game Geek as of the time of this video include worker placement in some regard. So getting some skills to let you do well at worker placement games is going to go a long way in your board gaming career. So first, we're going to talk about what is a worker placement game, how does it work, talk a little bit about the difference between, pure worker placement games and the hybrid games, and then we'll go in and we'll cover all the tips you're going to need to know to succeed at worker placement games. Worker placement games are any game where players are using workers, or meeples, to select actions from a limited set of available locations or action spaces on the board. Most often, these action spaces are going to be able to only be occupied by one or a limited number of players. And so, being the first two action spaces and blocking other players from getting actions is a key part of the worker placement strategy. But we're going to dive into some of the specific examples of games that use this worker placement mechanic and how you can get ahead the next time you're playing. Alright, tip number one, not all actions are created equal. So let's look at a few examples here of situations where certain actions on the game board right off the bat are going to be more or less efficient than other actions. In this Russian railroads example, you can see that this action here requires one worker to get 2 black tracks, or we can get 3 black tracks for 2 workers. So in this case, it's much more efficient to use 1 worker to get the 2 tracks as opposed to use 2 workers to get 3 tracks, which is like 1.5 tracks per worker. So much more efficient action there. You can also see that this other action has the exact same action, and one spot requires 1 worker, one spot requires 2 workers for the exact same action. So in this case, it's pretty obvious to see which action is better than the others, but in certain games it might not be as easy to really do the math and understand what the best spots are. So when you first sit down and look at a game, take a look at the game board, try to understand the value of the different resources and spots, and figure out, okay, which of these spots are the best spots, to go to early. Because if you don't know that and your opponents do, you're going to be in a load of trouble. Okay, so tip number 2. Now that we've talked about the fact that the spots are not equal, right, and all the actions are going to have varying levels of desirability, how do we get ahead on getting the good actions? Well, that's where turn order and the flow of the game can really come in handy. So certain games are going to give you the opportunity to manipulate the turn order and use that to your advantage. So if we look at a game like Russian Railroads again, we can see that you have the option of choosing to go first or second in a subsequent round. Now, it's not always going to behoove you to go first, but if you can tell that there's a high value action that you want to take first in the next round, such as getting a really good engineer or something of that nature, it might be valuable for you to take the go first action. Similar concepts can apply in games like Agricola, where you have an option to send your worker to get the first player token. In Lords of Waterdeep, you can get the castle to go first. So use this strategically to your advantage and try to understand, do I need to go first? Can I afford to go second? How much will it hurt me if I go last? So understanding how to manipulate the turn order to get those high value actions, that's a really important trait to learn and an important skill to gain. Alright, so once you've kind of understood which actions are good on the board, understand how can I manipulate the turn order to get to those good actions more often, Well, that's not the only way that you can get ahead in a worker placement game. So we're going to bring you to tip number 3, and that is upgrade your actions. So if you can find a way to make it so that when you go to an action, you're getting more value out of that action than every other player is getting, then you're going to want to go to those actions repeatedly and continue to get an increased amount of value by going to those upgraded actions. So let's look at a few examples of how this one plays out. So in Lords of Waterdeep, there are plot quests which will give you added benefit when you take certain actions. So in this case, if I place my worker somewhere where I get a black cube, I can also get 2 gold. Now, what I can do is play this plot quest and then proceed to stop at locations throughout the game where I'm getting that 2 bonus gold, and that can really rack up. There's also some other plot quests where you get extra orange cubes, or you get the converse of the one we first discussed where you get black cubes when you take gold, or one where you get intrigue cards for getting purple. So all of these are an example of how I can take and upgrade my actions so that when I take an action, I'm getting more out of it than what my opponents are getting. So this is an excellent way that you can get ahead in these games. Alright, now tip number 4 is getting extra workers. So if you can't improve your actions and you can't always get the best action on the board, well, one way to get ahead is simply to have more actions than the other players. And in a worker placement game, that means unlocking extra workers. So back to our Lords of Waterdeep example, if I'm able to get the plot quest for the lieutenant, which gives me an extra worker, and I can complete this early in the game, I'm getting 1 extra action every round. So even if my actions aren't the best actions every time, I can still count on the fact that I'm getting an entire extra action every round. Other examples of this, if you look at viticulture, one of the strongest early plays is to take extra workers in the early rounds so that you have more actions in subsequent rounds. In the game Stone Age, the starvation strategy, where you continue to get more and more workers and choose not to feed those workers, is one of the most powerful, which just really illustrates what the power of having more workers and more actions can do for you. So those are some examples, but anytime you're playing a new worker placement game, maybe you're learning it for the first time, you're probably not going to do too bad if you just find out where to get an extra worker, get those extra workers, figure out the details later. It's a good place to start. Tip number 5 is anticipating and identifying others' needs and then using that to block the key important spots on the board. So most worker placement games have this mechanic where only one player can go to each action spot. Sometimes there could be 2 in certain situations, but for the most part, 1 person per spot. And if you have that situation, you need to identify which spots do my opponents want to go to that I can go to before them. Now, corollary to this point here, tip number 5 about blocking your opponents and anticipating their needs. Now, if you start to play against good opponents, they're going to be doing the same thing where they're thinking, well, okay, what do I want, or what do they want to do so that I can block them? So if everyone's trying to block each other, there's a good way that you can kind of game the system here, which is getting personal actions that only you have access to. So one of the ways, one of the examples of this is if we look again at Russian railroads, you can see that getting access to an engineer spot gives you access to a spot that no one else can go to. So that gives you an action that's not able to be blocked. So that can be a very powerful thing. All right, and tip number 6 goes hand in hand with what we were just talking about on tip number 5, and that is try to do something different than the other players. So since worker placement games are oftentimes about blocking and jockeying for position and getting your workers to the more valuable spots and blocking each other, it's really dog-eat-dog world. And if you can be the only player at the board that's doing a certain strategy or doing a certain thing, and you are going to spots on the board that other players might not want to go to, then that can really change the formula in your favor, right? If everyone's trying to go to this spot, really good spot, and we're all trying to go to it every round, I might get it, every couple rounds because it's being fought over. But if I'm the only one who wants wood, and everyone else is fighting over different resources, then the wood spots are going to be open for me every single time. So if you can figure out a way to craft a strategy that's going to some of the less popular spots, That can be something you can think about that'll get you ahead when we're playing a worker placement game. That's it, gamers. Those are the 6 tips you need to get the managerial prowess to win the next time you play a worker placement game. So until next time, good luck out there.